Welcome to Conversations for Change, our national conversation awakening, HBCU reckoning and revival.
is a very consistent and persistent effort to dismantle segregation through direct action, not nonviolent protests. And that had been unheard of until that time. And that is in part why student activists from Black colleges were so unique and Black colleges were so special because they were arguably at the next nexus of this modern civil rights movement in a way in which even the Black church was not.
The impact of that is had there not been the student nonviolent coordinator committee, there would not have been the Civil Rights Act of 1964 signed by President Lyndon Johnson. No SNCC, no Civil Rights Act, no Voting Rights Act, no Obama. It's just as clear as anything. So what we did as young college students was revolutionary in changing the condition of things in this nation.
Tonight is about conversation. So throughout the show, we want to hear from you. Place your comments and questions in the chat. On Facebook, YouTube, or our OV platform, and we'll share your thoughts. Let's check out WHUR FM 96.3 host Autumn. Autumn Joy, who recently talked with her listeners about their HBCU experience.
Y'all know I'm an HBCU grad. Yep, I went to University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. I'm asking my live squad to call in if you graduated from from an HBCU, or even if you're currently in school, holla at me. Let me know why it was so important for you to go to an HBCU. Rodney, which HBCU did you go to?
Morgan State University.
All right, MSU. So really quickly, talk about the importance of attending an HBCU.
Getting an education you can get it, anywhere, but it's the life experiences that you also gain when you go into an HBCU that I think is very important.
We know of the historic role HBCUs and their graduates have played in social justice. But what are some of the examples of HBCU communities advancing issues like voting rights, healthcare access, police reform, secondary education improvement, and more today?
What I think about, Jared, in terms of listening to that Shaw clip is that notion of without SNCC, you wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act,
Right.
a Voting Rights Act, you wouldn't have the work toward getting Obama into office. I'd back up and say without Shaw, without HBCUs, you wouldn't have SNCC.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of our question tonight. And joining us to help answer this question is Dr. Wes Bellamy, political chair. He's department chair of political science at Virginia State University. Dr. Kenesha Nicole Grant, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University, and Dr. Kalia Harris, the Vice President of K-12 Education Policy at the Center for American Progress. Dr. Bellamy, let's start with you. So you were actively involved in advocating for the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue in Virginia. It was removed today. Can you talk about what this means for HBCU communities that have fought so hard against systems and symbols of oppression?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to join illustrious guests and panelists like yourselves. In Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live, we actually removed our Confederate statues of both Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson about a month or so ago. And in Richmond, Virginia, the largest statue, the one in our state's capital on Monument Avenue, was removed today, much of which started here in Charlottesville and the work of which while I was on city council in 2016, led by activists here in the community and myself serving as the lone African American at the time and the vice mayor at the time. But I think it's important for us to notate that one, HBCU students, leaders, we've always been at the forefront of fighting and advocating for our people. That will never change. But what I'm very elated to see now is that we're pushing more towards a policy perspective. You see individuals from HBCUs using their collective power and influence across the spectrum and universities collaborating with each other to push policy, to be able to hold elected officials on the local, state, and federal level accountable for what they say they're going to do and ensure that they do it. And if they don't do it, then we rally and band together to hold them accountable with our voice and with our vote.
Dr. Bellamy, let's stick on that issue. You are actually part of an initiative at Virginia State that is actually embedded in the training of political activists and elected officials. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. I'm excited to announce that we are officially kicking off the John Mercer Langston Institute for African American Political Leadership this weekend. So on Friday and Saturday, we'll have our initial cohort of 17 individuals from across the Commonwealth of Virginia. These are persons who are some in undergrad, some who are former elected officials, some who are looking to make the next jump, mid-level executives and so forth. And what we're doing is developing a pipeline of the next level of leaders, whether that's those who are looking to be elected, whether that's those who are looking to work specifically on policy initiatives behind the scenes, those who are looking to be city managers, those who are looking to work at the State House and so forth. It's just a wide gamut of individuals from the activist and organizer side as well, who are all coming together. And we're talking specifically about how we use our talents to implement change. It's the first of its kind here in Virginia, a political institute focused specifically on Black folk and Black issues. And we're really proud to have it in what I believe to be the home of Black political activism, Petersburg, Virginia, at the Virginia State University.
Dr. Grant, this feeds right into your expertise on the impact of the Great Black Migration in the United States and the shift of political power. This is something you've written about in your book. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how that movement achieved greater political mobilization and activity across the United States?
Yeah, there's a very interesting relationship between historically Black colleges and Black people who go on to get elected to political office in general, and in particular in the story that I tell in the book about those who get elected to political office in the North. And so when you look at the individuals who went on to get elected to, who first moved during the Great Migration, where more than 6 million Black people leave the South, going to various places across the United States, when you look at the individuals who went on to get elected to office, we find that many of them are historically Black college graduates. And so we know that something special happens at the HBCU campus, such that individuals who are new to these communities in the North decide not only to run for office, but are successful in organizing their communities to get elected.
Now, Dr. Grant, just to follow up on that, with what is happening now with so many African Americans who are retiring and moving back down south, do you think that we're in the midst of a reverse Great Black Migration?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that question. That'll be the topic of the next book. So we are absolutely in the throes of a return migration. So I'm interested in Black migration and how it affects politics generally, starting with the Great Migration, because that's the first big one. But the one that is happening right now is absolutely a return migration to the South, not just retirees, but people, young people too, making the same kind of calculations about where can I go to have community? Where can I go to have political influence? Where can I go that's affordable? And that affordability, again, extends to young people and people who are a little older making decisions about where their dollars last. And just like we did in the Great Migration, see that it impacted politics as we think about a blue Georgia, or think about a
Mm.
potentially blue North Carolina, which should be coming in the next couple years. Those things are directly tied to Black migration, directly tied to HBCU activism, and should be driven by the folks who are out there in your audience today and who are on these campuses making a difference every day.
Dr. Harris, I just want to follow up with you. This whole idea of a blue Georgia and quite potentially a blue North Carolina. But in the back of my mind, Dr. Harris, I think about a red Texas. I think about a red Tennessee. I think about some of the dangers that Black folks are dealing with in the South. Can you talk a bit about how HBCUs throughout the South can help add protection that's needed for Black folks in these places that are still very red?
Absolutely. As a proud alumna of the Morgan State University, I am clear how important it is for HBCUs to really be protective and to provide supports both on the political front, but also in everyday living and engaging the public as it relates to their rights, as it relates to how they can be engaged in civic society. We have HBCUs across the South, but unbeknownst to some of the folk in Baltimore, Maryland is south of the Mason-Dixon line. And, we have issues that range from being in a blue state with a red governor, as I am in Maryland, to being in a very red state like Texas, but you see those glimmers of light in highly populated communities by Black folk like Dallas, like Houston, and you understand that the role of HBCUs in making sure those centers of Black excellence are anchored, that they are supported, that our community members have access to opportunities that have been long held from them. We see a resurgence of the celebration of Juneteenth and Freedom Day, the emancipation of enslaved people in this country. And we see the connections being made by HBCUs to capitalize on that. Furthermore, we see our children returning to HBCUs. Many people kind of adopted a grass is greener on the other side, or the white man's water is wetter, and felt like achievement at the collegiate level was sending their children to institutions that were not only not made for them, but also actively hostile to their existence. And we see, just like at Morgan State University, it has the largest freshman class it has ever had in its history. We see that happening across the South. So to capitalize on that and make sure that those students are being fortified and supported, that they're having access to careers across the spectrum of the future of work is going to be critical. And just like Dr. Grant said, when we think about politics and the number of folk who go from HBCUs into politics, people who may come from around the country and move to states like Texas and Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, and decide to build a family there, but also get civically engaged and get involved in politics so that those enclaves of blue spread throughout the state.
So, folks, this is an interactive show, so we want to hear from you. Put your questions in the chat and we will answer them live. We already have somebody chiming in, and the first question is for Dr. Bellamy. A student would like to know, how do you get started as an activist and balance that with your schoolwork, which I would add, which is what they're there to do, which is to succeed in class? How do you balance the two, Dr. Bellamy?
Well, I think what we talk a great deal about with our scholars at Virginia State University is that you're a scholar first. You're a student and you're a scholar first. And activism is a marathon. Everybody likes to quote Nipsey Hussle, the marathon continues, but you're truly running a marathon. So you got to run the first leg of the race, and that's the educating yourself on the issues. And hopefully that's what you're at the institution to do. Furthermore, as we move into activism, I think that you have to find out where you are best suited at your current moment in time. I think and I was just having this conversation with a student yesterday, where she said, well, I see some folks go on social media and they're doing all these great things and they're leading marches and they're speaking at this and they're my age, and I'm just feeling like I'm not doing enough. And I think that I would tell our young folk that, one, everything that we see on Instagram and everything we see on TikTok is not real life. A lot of it is cap. And secondly, that we have to do what God called us to do as individuals. Not everybody is meant to lead a 5,000 person march. Not everybody is meant to speak at the March on Washington. But I can say for a fact, I know that the statues would not have come down in Charlottesville without individuals on the back of the house or on the back end who people will never hear from, who did the policy and research work in order to allow me and others to be able to do this work. So we all have a role to play. God has put a calling on all of our lives. So do your part. And when it's your time, it'll be your time. But for now, focus on school and do what you're supposed to do.
Dr. Grant, we got another question. You went to FAMU, protest you, some of us like to call it. Do you think that HBCU students today share the same understanding of their responsibility to change community like the HBCU students of the past?
FAMU was definitely protest you. I think I was protesting with FAMU people while I was in 12th grade, like coming from South Florida to protest with FAMU students in Tallahassee. So yeah, that's certainly something that was part of our life then. I think it's something that's still part of historically Black college student life. When I started at Howard, which is now some time ago, the students there went viral for their online protest of the death of Mike Brown. Howard University students currently spend time in various communities in Washington, D.C. doing activist work. They currently spend time going to the White House, maybe a little bit less now that VP Harris is there than they did during the previous administration, but they are still thinking about those things and working on those things. And one of the things we have to remember is that the historically Black college is full of historically Black college graduates as members of their faculty. And so while I'm teaching my students about whatever we're talking about in state and local government, there's a little aside that is about Black politics as it exists, not just in who represents us in these state and local seats, but also what are the issues that matter to Black people and what should they do in their home states and communities to move the needle for Black people who live there. So absolutely, I think it is the case that they are still as active as we were. Although, again, I think the FAMU bunch is a special bunch. Being that we're down the street from the Capitol, it doesn't take much to get us riled up to go over there.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bellamy. Thank you, Dr. Grant, and thank you, Dr. Harris, for just laying the groundwork and giving our students an insight into what it looks like when academics meets activism, when it actually happens on the streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a moment and check back in with Autumn to see what her listeners have to say.
Talk about the importance of attending an HBCU and why you decided to do it.
When I came to Howard University, I did not even realize the importance of an HBCU, coming from a little small town in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But once coming, I just knew the importance of, being in a community with, people that look like me, professors that look like me, and teaching me about Black history, teaching me about culture, and just really just embodying like a full Black African-American experience, things that I just never knew growing up.
Many HBCU graduates credit the nurturing environment of HBCUs for helping them realize their potential as leaders.
So how do HBCUs affirm students in their identity? And why is developing leaders so important in this age of racial reckoning? Let's take another look at the Emmy Award-winning film, Shaw Rising.
I was hoping that having elected the first Black president of this country the issue of race would have been subsided, but it's not.
I think we are striving to live in a world that's non-racial by removing a lot of what we have inherited and what we've been taught and what we've been willing to accommodate.
For African Americans, there are still huge gaps of educational attainment, huge gaps of employment attainment, huge gaps of wealth attainment. And so the notion that we're in a post-racial society, that we've achieved all of the goals of this great democracy, I think you'd find most African Americans hard-pressed to embrace that notion.
I believe that racism exists because we turn to fear more than we do love. We fear what we don't understand. We fear what we don't recognize. We fear what we feel will take something from us. And if you really sit and think about it, none of that is real. No one is trying to take anything from anyone. No one is trying to overthrow anyone's power or infringe on anyone else's rights. Everyone, I think, wants the same thing. We all want opportunity. We all want to be happy. We all want to achieve. We want that for our children. We want that for our communities. And to actively deprive one group of that for one reason or another, I think it really boils down to fear.
I think so often we become complacent with things as they are, rather than how things ought to be. So we need more soldiers of truth who are willing to step forward and follow that inner voice that lets you know what's right and what's wrong.
So how have HBCU communities seized the moment to research and develop legislation supporting Black colleges? And what are some examples at the state level?
NPT senior correspondent Charles Robinson files this report on legislative efforts at the state and federal levels.
We finally got to this day. I'm saying that on behalf of a sister and a mother of two HBCU graduates. And so not to hold that up, let's get started.
The final settlement provides $577 million to 4 historically Black colleges and universities in Maryland. It's spread out over 10 years.
This roadmap and how Maryland has actually set a path forward in a very positive way. Other states will probably definitely be looking at this, and that where we have HBCUs.
Not the first time that we've seen kind of states settle these disputes over decades of underfunding for HBCUs. We've seen it in Mississippi, we've seen it in Alabama, we've seen it, across the country.
Litigation tends to be that tool of last resort when things just move the way that they should.
For those not in Maryland, Christmas came early with a multi-million-dollar grant to 23 HBCUs.
These dollars are unrestricted, which Mackenzie Scott team was saying that we trust and value and respect the leadership at our institutions that will make the best decision as it relates to how to use those funds. Unheard of.
The Scott Grant put in motion a number of gifts from corporations like Facebook and Google. Many people ask, what's the return on investment? Well, many HBCUs are seeing it in increased enrollments.
More students accepted our offer to come to Morgan this year than ever. And so we have over a 100% increase in the number of new students at Morgan this year over 2019.
At the federal level, the bipartisan Ignite HBCU Excellence Act would provide additional funding to renovate, modernize, or construct new campus facilities and includes technological upgrades. I'm Charles Robinson.
Okay, so joining us to discuss this important issue are Representative Harold Love Jr., representing the 58th District in the Tennessee Legislature, Senator Charles Sidnor III, representing the 44th District in the Maryland General Assembly, and Oyin Adedoyin, a reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education and a 2021 graduate of Morgan State University. Welcome to the show, one and all. Senator Sidnor, we will begin with you. You were the lead lawmaker on legislation that led to that landmark federal lawsuit settlement for the $577 million granted to Maryland's 4 HBCUs. Can you talk to us about the process of galvanizing support for that kind of policymaking, and how did you get communities behind and aware of your efforts?
Yes, and good evening, and thank you for having me this evening. I came into the legislature back in 2015, and as a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, this was one of our priorities going into the 2017 administration. The chair at the time asked if I would not mind leading or co-leading some efforts that the Black Caucus wanted to make in terms of attempting to settle this lawsuit. I will tell you that I did not do too well on the first shot, but there were lessons learned. We didn't do a good job of galvanizing and having the type of support from HBCU alumni and students and the like. Lesson learned, we went into later sessions. There was some leadership change in both the House as well as the Senate. And there was some renewed efforts. Everyone within the Black Caucus was 100% behind what we were attempting to do. We worked on and had a rally put together where we had speakers from our HBCUs, all 4 of them, come. I would say you probably had well over between 100 and 200 people at that rally. We had our historically, well, I should say our Divine Nine organizations involved in galvanizing their membership to come out. And we had people testifying, sending letters, expressing the desire to settle the lawsuit. We passed that bill in the 2020 session. Unfortunately, Governor Hogan vetoed that legislation. So it was a priority going into the 2021 session. Rather than trying to overturn or override his veto, we put in a similar bill, and ultimately he ended up signing that legislation. And our Attorney General did his negotiations with the plaintiffs, and I believe it was at the end of May that settlement agreement was signed, and it was done.
That now that the lawsuit has been settled, now that the money is going to come down the pipeline over the next 10 years, how are you doing the work to keep people motivated in terms of focusing on HBCUs and trying to lift them all up to where they need to be?
The people who have been motivated, those alumni who've been working along with me, they're still motivated. They know that the legislation calls for funding to go to these schools over the next 10 years. So I can promise you, I get calls from alumni from the schools every couple months, just talking and giving me information that I may want to be aware of in order just to monitor and see how things are going. So I don't think people won't be motivated. The alumni were extremely motivated in getting this lawsuit settled, and they're extremely motivated in making certain that the funding that the state put forth is used in the way that they think it should be over the next 10 years.
Let's go to you in Tennessee. So Maryland finishes up their settlement and litigation early in the summer. It is right around that time that you started spearheading efforts to analyze and report on funding inequities to Tennessee State University in the form of land grant funding and federal matching from the state of those federal funds. Can you talk a little bit about that program, some of your discovery, and what lies ahead for that effort to reclaim some $500 million in funding owed to Tennessee State?
Sure, absolutely. Our journey to this $544 million really started when I got elected in 2012. Had a conversation with Dr. Glover, who was the new president of Tennessee State, about what issues were most important to her. And she expressed the fact that they had not received their state match for their land grant money. So we worked over the next couple of years to get the state match for the land grant money. And in 2015, we were able to get the match finally made. But then I began to ask the question, if Tennessee State had not had the match in the years that I was in office, how much money were they kept from getting in prior years? So initial research showed us the first 20 years, and then had other conversations. And then we had a committee formed by the speakers of the House and Senate that was really going to research how much money was missing from Tennessee State's coffers from the state from 1955 to 2020, because we know that there was a disparity between what the 1862 land grant and the 1890 land grant Tennessee State were getting. Committee began to research, looked in the budget books, discovered that from 1955 to 2007, there were no entries for Tennessee State University to receive land grant dollars. And so this led us to understand that there was a huge funding disparity. And that amount, to your point, ended up being $544 million in those state matching funds. And the biggest issue is this: when those state matching dollars are not given to the university has to then put those matching dollars up in order to keep those federal funds that they've drawn down still in the school.
So, Oyen, I want to come with you. With your work at the Chronicle of Higher Education, you have kind of a long eye on what is happening. You can step back a bit from being right on the ground with the legislation. Can you talk with us about how HBCUs, with this recent bump in funding, how are they doing across the board?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting to see what not just the state funding, because what we've seen over the period of recent years is that this historic underfunding of HBCUs happens all over the country. And so it's interesting to see donations from philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott, for example, who donated to dozens of HBCUs. And an interesting study actually came out of Rutgers University that analyzed what were the differences in some of the HBCUs that she donated to compared to those that didn't receive donations. And it's a known fact that most HBCUs have a majority of Pell eligible students, students who require certain funding in order to even attend college. And so it was interesting to see how certain universities were leveraging the funds that were given to them from Mackenzie Scott in order to encourage state funding. And so in Morgan State, the university president, David Wilson, actually used around 500,000 of the money from the Mackenzie Scott donation to kind of come to the state and say, listen, we can put this up if you give us a $3 million appropriation towards staffing and research at Morgan State's new Center for Urban Health Equity. And so he was able to kind of leverage a bit of this funding that was gifted and use it to then match up to the state and say, now we need these funds to be rolling in year round, yearly.
I would ask all three of you, just in brief, if we recognize that this era of funding, this era of legislative activity is all in the name of catching up HBCUs, is there a threshold or is there a moment that you guys see that says, okay, now we're starting to thrive? We're not catching up, we're thriving now. Any view on that from either of you?
I would say it's definitely going to be a long game. It's definitely going to be something that's going to take many years to see the effects of a lot of these donations, which are, some only recently coming to light. It's gonna take a longer time to see what that can actually do for the student populations at HBCUs.
And I'll say, look at Tennessee. We had a study that just came back from our other committee that showed that there's $337 million in deferred maintenance at Tennessee State. And so when we're talking about catching up, you're literally talking about the fact that even if you start today working on those buildings, it's going to take at least 5 to 7 to 10 years just to get those buildings up to speed. And so you're talking about a 15 to 20 year, I think, place where we will be able to look back and say, yes, we have gotten beyond just trying to catch up and starting now to thrive.
Yeah, I mean, I would also like to add really quickly something interesting about the Mackenzie Scott donations were that these were unrestricted funds. And so some funds that come to HBCUs do come with restrictions or come with certain allocations. And it kind of goes back to that idea of there are, many issues. There are deferred maintenance issues, various campus dorm requirements. And so those will require specific funding to kind of reach those specific issues.
I think here in Maryland, once we see the types of programs that the schools don't currently have, and those programs thriving, and as was said, this is going to take some time. I mean, but when we see those programs that are thriving and bringing in students that otherwise might be looking at other institutions, I think at that point, we're going to begin seeing the success of the settlement of this particular lawsuit here in Maryland.
And so, folks, this is an interactive show. What do you think? We want you to take a moment, place your comments in the chat. We will answer your questions live.
Let's go to one of those questions now. How can we continue to uplift the stories and students that are still affecting change on our campuses? I would ask you that, Dr. Love, because you are a product of TSU. Your dad is a product of TSU. You got a family legacy at Tennessee State Big Blue. How does that work intergenerationally and into the future?
Well, I think that students are now seeing that when we talk about problems in our society, underfunding our HBCUs is a prime example of problems we have in our society when it comes to race relations. So these efforts by legislators and alums to get money back into the institutions, I think inspires students to stay active, to see the importance of elections, to see the importance of being involved in the growth of university, because you have to make investments for the next generation. And so I've had a lot of students who are currently at Tennessee State tell me, thank you for what you're doing to make our campus better. We appreciate what you're doing. And I say to them, you got to understand elections matter, and these things are very important.
So, Olyan, I will come to you with the next question. I know you're probably right about this, because since the current climate of police brutality comes up very often, what can we do to push out large numbers of law students to change things? How are you writing about this and getting students encouraged to go into the field?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it kind of has to do with what we mentioned earlier about programming. And so this funding that's been allocated to HBCUs will be used to kind of encourage different programming. And I know your question was kind of geared towards going out into the field, but something that we also saw this year had to do with health. And so now we've seen a lot of HBCUs kind of put some of those resources towards, okay, let's develop our health centers and let's get students into grad school to study medicine. And so you're seeing people in these fields, especially African Americans, in fields like health and in fields like law enforcement, in order to really bring a change to possible pandemics in the future, like we saw racial justice and the COVID pandemic.
Thank you so much, Oyen. We will continue to watch what's happening with the funding for HBCUs. Thank you so much, Representative Harold Love Jr., representing the 58th District in Tennessee, Senator Charles Sidnor III, representing the 44th District in Maryland's General Assembly, and Oyen, thank you so much, from the Chronicle of Higher Education and 2021 graduate of Morgan State University. Now let's take a moment to check back in with Autumn.
Line right now, I've got Senior Vice President and Chief Content Officer of Maryland Public Television, Mr. Travis Mitchell. Hi, Travis.
Hey, Autumn, how are you?
I am good. So HBCU week, wow, are you excited?
I'm very excited. I couldn't be more proud. I'm super excited.
Yeah, so talk about why HBCU week is so important.
Well, Autumn, I know you probably have been talking today, I'm sure, with your audience, and you are a proud graduate of University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Yes.
Quite simply, for many of us who have graduated from HBCUs, the way I put it is this. I grew up on the campus of Shaw University. My parents went to Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was exposed to what I believe was my Wakanda before I knew what Wakanda was. It was a place where I was affirmed. It was a place where I believed I could be anything that I dreamed of. And the entire environment nurtured me as a leader and prepared me to be my best. And so I believe that had it not been for Shaw, no Shaw University, I would have never gone to Morgan State University. So no Shaw, no Morgan, no me.
Many HBCU graduates credit the nurturing environment of HBCUs for helping them realize their potential as leaders.
Just how do HBCUs affirm their students in their identity, and why is developing leaders so important in this age of racial reckoning? Let's take another look at the Emmy Award-winning film, Shaw Rising.
It's graduation day at Shaw University. 150 years after it was founded to teach freed slaves to read and write, the seeds sown here by Henry Martin Tupper are still bearing fruit. But given the broad range of options in higher education today, some question the ongoing need for historically Black colleges and universities.
We need HBCUs because there are still underrepresented people who need education. They may not have had the money, they may not have had the grades, they may not have had the family support. But Shaw provides, and other HBCUs provide that opportunity, that leg up to level the playing field and maintain opportunity for all.
If there is an antidote to racism in this nation, it is education. And that is why it is so important that we invest in it and we invest in institutions that have proven track records in serving the best interests of their students and of their communities, despite whatever difficulties they face. If you even for a moment, just removed Blackness from these institutions, I don't think that anyone would argue about their validity. What we're basically arguing about is, should race matter? And fortunately or unfortunately, it still does. The way in which it matters here matters best and matters most, I'd like to believe, in order for America to live up to its creed and to be the nation that it has aspired to be.
In my mind, are HBCUs relevant? I think, yeah. You know, any institution that can provide an education to somebody is definitely going to be relevant. And to say that that HBCUs aren't relevant is very offensive to some people.
What mattered at the origination of HBCUs, why HBCUs were created in the first place. We needed opportunities for education. We needed advocacy. We needed a support system. We needed a safe haven. And those things that were needed then are still needed now.
We need them because of the outstanding service that they have rendered to a significant population that has been ignored. And until racism is removed in our society, there will still be a need to have institutions that push for justice and equality.
Joining us to talk about their role as soldiers of truth on their campuses and in their communities are Jatia Stewart, Student Government President at Bowie State University, Alana Thomas, Vice President of Howard University Student Association, Ayotomiwa Tommy Fashola, SGA President at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Good evening to all of you.
So,
Good
Ms.
evening. Thank you guys for having us.
We're so happy that you joined us. We want to hear from the students about your experience at HBCUs. Now, Ms. Thomas, I'll start with you. Howard is unique because for generations, students have fought for national, campus, and local issues. Can you talk about what it's like to be a part of a campus that supports and encourages activism?
Yes, so coming from the state of Florida where activism is very dim, I must say, unfortunately, coming to Howard University, being in the center of DC, basically being in the center of everything. We're just the epicenter of creating movements and uprising and uplifting students to fight for what's right and what, we deserve in this nation.
Let me follow up on that since you're at Howard. Is there a tipping point for you and for the student body? Because we know Howard is really famous or infamous for pushing back on administration as well. Are there ways where you look at activism on campus and say, here's where we need to push, or here's where we need to collaborate with our institution?
Yes, so that is why the way our student government structure is set up is into 3 different branches. And so me being a part of the executive branch with my president, we are the bridge between administration and students. And, we have to draw that line in which when speaking with administration, we simply say, this is not right. What you are doing, the policies you are implementing, or the changes that you are making without the voices of the students is just wrong. And if we have to step up and speak up and push back, then we will do so. It's not the first time Howard has done it, and it's not the last time Howard students will do it.
And then we'll go to you, Ms. Stewart. At Bowie State University, we just came out of a segment talking about the student activism in the Maryland lawsuit. What are some of the issues that Bowie students feel are important, not just on campus, but in the community as well? And how is the SGA supporting the efforts of those students?
Hi, so being the SGA president at the oldest HBCU in Maryland, of course, there's like a lot of challenges that we face here on campus, but one main thing would be having a voice. Just being young Black people, period. Like we always want to have a voice. So that's why also like my SGA, we're a part 3 different branches, and we add different positions to the board that we see will help people get their voices out. And we have this position that's the political actions and community outreach chair. So that position allows students to have this one person dedicated to marches, having people express their feelings, like just advocating everything for all of the students on our campus.
Ms. Stewart, I want to follow up on that. When you talk about advocating for all the students on your campus, when you look at change at Bowie State University, what does that look like for you from your perspective?
So change for me, in my perspective, it would just be it's a lot, honestly. From my perspective, I will say, because it's like so much they could, there's always room for improvement. But in my perspective would be just the students like feeling like, yeah, the administrators are going to be here for me. They're going to listen to me. I won't have to I wouldn't have to rebel against them, or like I could be able to say anything and they'd be like, yes, I got you. And just be able to live harmoniously, honestly.
Well, Ms. Fashola, I want to bring you into the conversation. So you are a member of both the NAACP and you're a councilwoman for Men of Distinction. Can you talk about the work that's being done at UMES to teach male students how to advocate for themselves and also to teach female students how to advocate as well?
Hello, thank you. I am a part of women. I am on the Women's Council for Men and Distinction. Being on that council, I sit on making sure that, yes, they're here for the men, but also seeing if they could help the women as well. Being an MOD, they basically start from college freshmen and try to uplift them and change them so by their senior year, they are changed, reformed, and rejuvenated. Also, being an NAACP, we stand for Black people, for Black people. And also with that, we actually had a meeting today about what we want to do for this school year. We just want everything to be great. And being on SGA as well, being the SGA president, I personally see fit that everything that is for my students, no hesitation, I work for them.
We know a lot of you out there are HBCU students and alums. Get your comments and questions in the chat. What do you think about some of the conversation going on here?
We already have some people who are chiming in. So we have a parent who would like to know, what is the pathway to an HBCU? So I'd like to ask you and come back to you, Ms. Fashola, what is the pathway? What pathway did you take to get to your HBCU?
My pathway I took to be at my HBCU my senior year of high school was, I personally was looking for the route that didn't cost my parents the most amount of money, but also a place where I personally feel at home and also had my major. When I first came to UMES for my Enrollment 101 in July of 2019, it automatically felt at home. I'm 3 years in and I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to go to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. This is home, and a lot of people say that for their own school, but I'd have it no other way.
Alana, let me come to you with this next question from some of our viewers. How do we continue to grow this movement of including communities that surround our HBCU in the work we do on our campus? I know this is important in Howard because you guys are often talking about gentrification, educational opportunities for young people, public health. So how does the Howard student body think about including the community in its activism work?
Well, one of our biggest goals is starting in the school system. Oftentimes we have a lot of organizations on campus and off campus that volunteer within the school system, educating, young minority, Black and brown children that there is a different path for them besides attending, the predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and that there is like a safe space for them to be included, to learn about their identity and grow a stronger foundation on who they are as an individual and as a Black person. And, for us, we always look for community service opportunities within the community because, like, as you said, Howard, the community is becoming slowly gentrified, and we are trying to push back on that because at the end of the day, Howard has been here since 1867. We were here first, and we don't want to see the community dwindle to what it's becoming into. And so we definitely try and partner with outside organizations around the campus in order to fight homelessness, clean up our parks, just do what we have to do in order to carry on the legacy of DC being chocolate city, being the Black community.
I love that idea, just keeping the legacy clear and intact. Now, folks, we have received a number of questions and we will continue to take them as they come in. So get yours in now. Thank you so much to Ms. Stewart, Ms. Thomas, and Ms. Fashola. Thank you for the work that you do on your campuses.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Now, HBCUs are known for affirming and accommodating non-traditional students. Our senior correspondent, Charles Robinson, discusses the unique journey of one such student.
Hello, my name is Lisa Boyd. I am an interpreter for the deaf for over 20 years. I have 2 children, and I'm married for 27 years.
So what school do you go to, and what are you studying now?
The school I attend is Morgan State University, and I went back to school to get my teaching degree. So I am an elementary education major.
Morgan State University is one of the preeminent HBCUs in the United States. Its urban research is second to none.
After my kids were older, You know, I always like to say it's never too late to be who you were meant to be. And I always wanted to go back for teaching. So once I put it in my head to do it, I went to Morgan. That's where I wanted to go. And I started school, and I've been doing that ever since. I've always wanted to go back to school. It makes me whole because now I can see the end. Next year I'll graduate. And 4 years ago, I was sitting around like, what should I do? Should I do? And the hardest part to me was taking that first step. And I tell a lot of people when they think about going back to school, the hardest part is taking that first step. And once you get into it, then you're off and running. When I walk the campus, I love seeing so many of African American people. I mean, I've been at colleges before and it's been a mix, but it's like, it gives you pride. Sometimes when I'm walking the campus, I just stop and just look at the campus and all the young people, the African American people, and we can it's like when you're in class and you're talking, everybody can relate to everything, and it's just a pride just to walk through the campus and see so many of African American young people. Yes, I'm older, so I'm happy to see them walking the campus because it's more to us than what they may see on television. When you are around so many of people that want an education, it encourages me and it empowers me to do more and to be more.
Joining us now to continue this conversation are two former HBCU student leaders, Mr. Ian Finley, a former SGA president at Shaw University and a first-year law student at the University of Florida, and Sinead Okafor, an HBCU advocate and graduate of Morgan State University. Brother Okafor, I will start with you, sir. You are twice removed as a graduate from Morgan, as an activist, as a student advocate, as a recent alumnus. What would you say that the university does well to make sure that the perspectives and the needs of all students are represented in student life and uses it to propel students out to success?
Thank you, Jared, for that question. I think what the university does good is it becomes that village. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child, and the university becomes that village. It becomes that conduit. What I enjoy about the university is that it puts the tools in front of the students and allows the students to use them at their own discretion to build the future that they want to see. Nobody's going to force you at the institutions to do this, that, or a third, but what they will do is make sure that they have everything at their disposal for you to create a better name for yourself, a better time for yourself. And education, there's a lot of room to learn, from the murals that you see on campus to the events with student life and Greek life. It's always an opportunity in this village for you to gain information and insight from fellow villagers.
So, Mr. Finley, I'll come to you as a first-year law student. If you could just explain to us why it's important to understand the law as it intersects with activism to really be able to change the environment where we find ourselves at this moment.
Most definitely. I feel like my experiences at a HBCU place me in direct contact with the needs that are most pressing to African Americans, of course. The reason I definitely wanted to study the law stemmed from, of course, George Floyd and the Breonna Taylors, because we want to see the systemic change needed to, evolve our nation into the future of what Black excellence and what social reform is supposed to be. So that is kind of the reason why.
And we got time for one more question for both of you, just very quickly in 10 seconds. What is one thing you'd like to see the HBCU do in light of everything that we're experiencing in social justice, public health? What could the HBCU do to more fortify that kind of spirit that you guys have experienced?
Do I go first?
Yep.
What the HBCU can continue to do is continue to remain a historically Black college and university. With all these new funds, that we make sure that we stick to those goals and those principles and be open to the ideas of the new generation of students coming up at the school.
So thank you so much for just giving us this insight. Folks, let's take a quick check back in with Autumn.
So which HBCU did you graduate from?
Norfolk State.
In your own words, let the people know why you decided on an HBCU.
Oh, I definitely decided to go to an HBCU because when I was doing my research, honestly, they really had the programs and things that I wanted. and catered more to my needs. And it was one of the best decisions of my life, just being around the community of people that look like me, that kind of understood a lot of the things that I was going through. It just really provided a great support for me. And the wealth of knowledge that was there, they pulled no punches and only pulled out the best out of me.
So, how can the country better support HBCUs? Let's take another look at the film Shaw Rising for answers.
I was hoping that having elected the first black president of this country, the issue of race uh, would have been subsided, but it's not.
I think we are striving to live in a world that's non-racial by removing a lot of what we have inherited and what we've been taught and what we've been willing to accommodate.
For African Americans, there are still huge gaps of educational attainment, huge gaps of employment attainment, huge gaps of wealth attainment. And so the notion that we're in a post-racial society, that we've achieved all of the goals of this great democracy, I think you'd find most African Americans hard-pressed to embrace that notion.
I believe that racism exists because we turn to fear more than we do love. We fear what we don't understand. We fear what we don't recognize. We fear what we feel will take something from us. And if you really sit and think about it, none of that is real. No one is trying to take anything from anyone. No one is trying to overthrow anyone's power or infringe on anyone else's rights. Everyone, I think, wants the same thing. We all want opportunity. We all want to be happy. We all want to achieve. We want that for our children. We want that for our community. Communities, and to deprive actively deprive one group of that for one reason or another. I think it really boils down to fear.
I think so often we become complacent with things as as they are rather than how things ought to be. So we need more soldiers of truth. Truth who are willing to step forward. And follow that inner voice that lets you know what's right and what's wrong. Wrong.